Queensland still on notice as a tropical cyclone attempts to wrap itself up in the Coral Sea. However, it remains substantially weaker than we were expecting, so a bit of good news here. A lot of good news here for your January 24th Cyclone update, brought to you by Force 13 Australia. If you are brand new to the channel, please do consider subscribing, and if you do want to show your support even further, then please do leave a like and leave some feedback in the comment section down below as well. But nonetheless, taking a look at this developing tropical cyclone here, we've been saying that for about a week, so will this ever get named into Cyclone Kirrily? We really don't know at this point, but it is still expected to make landfall on the Australian coastline, specifically Townsville, or Townsville to air, as a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone as per the Bureau of Meteorology's forecast. But again, they're really backing it down, and I'm also backing it down, so we don't know what this system is going to be doing 100%, but I'm going to attempt to give you a very detailed forecast and the expected impacts around the coastline and inland in this update. So taking a look at the current picture, hot across the Australian centre, but what's new, it's this time of the year. The Australian summer, it's always blisteringly hot across the red centre of Australia. Showers across our south and also some storms up in the north associated with the tropical moisture from the remnants of tropical low 03U, which is moving through central Western Australia over the mining communities about now. It never got named into a tropical cyclone, and it should start to die off over the next 48 hours. Still, it's going to be a clear day for parts of the Whitsundays and the Queensland coastline. A little bit windy, but there's no rain expected for those locations yet, even though there's an 80% chance of a cyclone developing basically on their doorstep. It's a really big, broad system, so it's going to really struggle to get itself wrapped up nicely. It is firing up some new convection over its centre, which means thunderstorm activity is increasing, thus the storm is intensifying, but it's struggling in basically every metric whatsoever, and I'm going to explain why it is doing so bad a little bit later on in the video, so stick around until then. Here's a look at the cyclone forecast graphic. The Bureau of Meteorology expect a Category 2 strength system to make landfall. I only expect a Category 1 strength system to make landfall, so if you haven't prepared adequately so far, downgrade your preparations for a Category 1 strength tropical cyclone if you live in the warning zone from Ayr down to Serena, including Mackay, Bowen and the Whitsunday Islands, and also in the watch zone from Innisfail down to Ayr, including Townsville and extending inland to Charters Towers. Townsville is probably going to be the landfall site, or just outside of Townsville to Ayr, as we have been expecting for the past couple of days. So if you do live in Townsville, make sure you're preparing for tropical cyclone conditions from tomorrow morning. So taking a look at the Access G3 wind forecast, there's really not much to talk about here. It still becomes a cyclone as it makes landfall on Townsville. In fact, just outside of Townsville, delivering cyclone conditions from about Cardwell down to Ayr, or maybe even Bowen in one or two places. So very gusty conditions are still expected. It will be a tropical cyclone at the end of the day, so it will bring damaging winds ashore, and also some very heavy rainfall. There's been a big shift in the forecast post landfall, though. It's not expected to move down to southeastern Queensland as per every major model has once said, and it's now expected to move inland. So the forecast is still relatively uncertain, and I was very reluctant to pull the trigger on giving a rainfall forecast for southeast Queensland, and I'm very glad that I did, because it doesn't look like the storm is going to go on to affect there anymore, which is some good news for people down there. Now, taking a look at the rainfall picture nationwide, you can see a little bit of rainfall still remaining across the WA centre from tropical low 03U, and a bit of tropical moisture up in the north, but apart from that, it's looking relatively dry until next weekend, when we start to see some storms fire up across northern New South Wales, and then they move into Queensland. So that could be our next severe thunderstorm threat for the nation, so we're watching that closely on the AU channel as well, so make sure you are subscribed to get coverage on that if you are going to live, or if you live in the affected warning area. But apart from that, it's just wet across where this cyclone moves through. There's no real threat of really destructive winds. It's just the rainfall threat right now. And there is a lot of rainfall on the cards for Australia's centre. However, again, very uncertain future with this storm, so I'm not 100% sure what to call at this point. Now, taking a look at the temperature forecast, you can see some hot conditions persist across the centre of South Australia and central Queensland and the Northern Territory as well throughout today, and also some hot conditions for parts of Western Australia. But apart from that, relatively mild nationwide until very early next week, when it starts to warm up a little bit for parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory associated with those troughs that the tropical cyclone pushes in. In fact, it does get very hot towards the end of next week for some parts of tropical Western Australia, when we might start to see some temperatures approach 50 degrees Celsius, but again, looking long range, so the future is relatively uncertain. So here's a look at this swirly mess of thunderstorms that we're calling tropical low 05U at this point. It's getting closer to the Queensland coastline, and you guys will start to see some cloud activity today and some pretty blustery conditions, but definitely not cyclone conditions until probably tomorrow morning, and that's if it even bothers to get to cyclone status at this point, because it's looking like a hot mess at this point, a very ugly system, and it's certainly not classifiable as a tropical cyclone. So I'm very disappointed that we don't actually have a system out of this. I was hoping we'd get at least a category 1 at this point so we could track it a lot better and understand what's going on with it, but it's a very, very difficult forecast. And also, might I add, there's absolutely no reason for it to be doing this badly. Conditions are very good for this storm, so that's interesting. So as we continue to take a look at the satellite imagery from this tropical low right now, you can see it's swirling around. It's got this very big, broad center, and it's currently centered over Lihu Reef here, and that's north of Marion Reef here. Now, Marion Reef is actually receiving cyclone winds right now. Winds 65 kilometers an hour out of the southeast rather. So it's about 35 knots, which is tropical cyclone winds, which means that this storm does have gale force winds, especially on its southern side. You can see all through here throughout this thunderstorm activity down towards that's Frederick Reef here, and I believe that's Creel Reef. I'm not actually sure what that's called. Maybe that is Creel Reef, but there are cyclonic wind gusts extending down towards the south of the system, so don't be fooled. It still is packing a punch in terms of maximum wind speeds, and it's also got some pretty heavy rainfall through here in this thunderstorm activity. But I mean, it is a really ugly system. It is certainly not a tropical cyclone at this point. It's not looking that good. In fact, it looks like something you'd see way further south. I've seen east coast lows off the shores from Sydney look substantially better than this in terms of tropical cyclone beauty standards. So this is really an ugly system, and it's something that we were hoping would happen with this storm, because we didn't really want a category 3 or 4 going ashore on the Queensland coastline. But I mean, it should at least be a category 1 strength system by now. The conditions are near perfect for this tropical cyclone, but it's just not making the most of it. So the models have done a really bad job predicting this cyclone, and I guess I have to a degree as well. So I do apologize for fear-mongering, I guess, from calling that category 3 or category 4 strength landfall, because it's definitely not going to happen at this time. And I do apologize for my shoddy forecasting there, but again, a really difficult forecast to make, as with all tropical cyclones. Now, we are going to take a look at the wind forecast and see if we can piece anything together right now. I take this with a really big pinch of salt, but I do expect damaging winds to extend along the Queensland coastline from Cardwell down towards Proserpine and Airlie Beach from tonight into tomorrow. But you can see throughout Wednesday, it does start to develop a little bit better, and it does intensify, and I can't see a future where this doesn't intensify and become a tropical cyclone by early Thursday morning. But I mean, we've already had this storm dotter around in the Pacific Ocean for about a week, and I really can't get over the fact that it isn't a tropical cyclone at this point. That's very, very strange. But you can see a fully fledged tropical cyclone by Thursday morning, and then into Thursday evening. It does make landfall with maximum sustained winds around 100 kilometers an hour, so it's probably approaching category 2 status at this point. It's definitely a strong system, and one not to be taken lightly. And you can see peak wind gusts on the northern side, 150 kilometers an hour, so it will definitely be packing a punch at this point. And those destructive wind gusts going to Townsville as well. Peak wind gusts there might approach 125 kilometers an hour. But you can see that landfall north of Townsville, which is way off the landfall from Ayr or Cape Baldwin Green from where we were expecting. The Bureau of Meteorology is actually expecting a landfall right on top of Townsville as a category 2 strength tropical cyclone. And the Axis G3 model is a very similar situation to that. So I'm inclined to support a landfall on Townsville at this point. I know we said we had the landfall location really honed in, but the fact that it's landfalling on Townsville doesn't actually make a big difference to the forecast from a couple of days ago. Townsville can still expect category 2 conditions, and that's all because the system is far weaker than what we were expecting. But cyclone conditions are expected to extend south of Cardwell down towards Airlie Beach, Hamilton Island, Proserpine, that sort of area, and that does include locations such as Ingham, Cardwell, Ayr, and inland to communities such as Charters Towers and Ravenswood. They're expecting full-blown cyclone conditions extending from Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening and Friday morning, when the storm should move far enough inland to start weakening over Hughenden and then towards Maxwellton. And this is when we're going to really start to see this rainfall threat develop from this tropical cyclone. As this moves through as a tropical low, the future remains very uncertain from this system. It kind of just bounces around for a couple of days. Now, I don't think this bouncing around is because of uncertainty. I think it's because of the storm actually going to be bouncing around. I think it's because of the system's future uncertainty. The track forecast is very uncertain for this tropical cyclone, so I think the Access G3 model just has it stalling here because it doesn't know what to do with the system, which is fair enough. I mean, we've all got no idea what to make of this storm. But yeah, it does move then into Australia's red centre down towards Birdsville, up north of Moomba, and then across to Oodnadatta in South Australia. And it will dump a little bit of rainfall through here, so give the desert maybe 100 millimetres if this forecast was to materialise. But again, a very uncertain one and a very difficult one, and it's many thousands of kilometres away from the initial track forecast. We're expecting it to parallel the Queensland coastline and then head down towards Brisbane and the Gold Coast. That's very unlikely to happen at this point. There's no real model support for that happening. I do believe all major forecast models have dropped that. I will just take the GFS model back. The GFS has the remnants of the system up here past Mount Isa, and the Eastern Relief has it here around Mount Isa as well. So there's actually fairly decent model certainty of the system being somewhere around Mount Isa by the start of next week. But it is a very uncertain forecast and quite a difficult one to make. One thing's for sure, quite a lot of rainfall expected in tropical Queensland, but I'm going to refuse to comment on how much rainfall is expected there until this system actually makes landfall, because I'm really not sure and I can't give an accurate picture. And if you do really want to forecast 0 to 1,000 millimetres for some locations, that's how uncertain I am. I have zero clue on what's going to happen up there, and I do apologise for that. Now, we'll take a look at rainfall for this tropical cyclone's run up to landfall. As with all cyclones, torrential rainfall is expected around its core north of Townsville, south of Cardwell, around Ayr and Boa and that sort of area. There will be some places that pick up to 400 millimetres from just the landfall alone, but because of how shoddy this system looks right now, the situation that we're seeing for up to 800 millimetres falling around Mackay and Airlie Beach, I'm completely dropping that. I reckon there'll be places from the inflow bands of this cyclone that pick up 200 to 300 millimetres of rainfall. That's certainly possible, but because it just looks like an absolute mess right now, and it's got no real thunderstorm activity firing up, and it doesn't look like it's got any intention to fire up any thunderstorm activity either, I'm refusing to say that there's going to be a substantial amount of rainfall around the Mackay area. In fact, if you were to take a look at rainfall accumulations over the next 5 days, it's up to 100 millimetres, so it's absolutely nothing in terms of how much rainfall they can get on a yearly basis. I mean, this is a tropical part of the world. They can pick up some ridiculous rainfall totals. The landfall side, of course, will pick up a lot of rainfall, 300 to 400 millimetres maybe in one or two places. But again, this situation where we're expecting these thunderstorms to be driven ashore for 2 or 3 days straight, that's completely gone. And the reason for that completely dissipating is because there's no real thunderstorm activity on the southern side of the system. This is a look at the infrared satellite imagery right now. I'm digressing a little bit, but I'll really break this down. So this gives us an idea of how intense and strong the thunderstorms are. In a tropical cyclone, typically you have a huge pool of like reds and blacks around the storm centre, which would be located here. And by huge, I mean they'd be extending out to the Queensland coastline by now. And if it's a really strong system, then you'd start to see an eye-like feature develop, which is basically a hole in the thunderstorm activity. Now, that's what you see in a strong tropical cyclone. In this situation, you've got 1 or 2 spots of reds and brown convection, which means that there's 1 or 2 strong thunderstorms around the centre, and it's doing a good job at starting to fire some up here over Leha Reef, that sort of area. And there's also some strong thunderstorms over here, but that's not hardly even associated with the tropical cyclone. Down here, this is kind of a bit deceiving. This is just very high cirrus clouds. These aren't thunderstorms moving over the top of Ogmore or West Hill right now. I forget the name of the areas through here, or maybe it just is a very remote part. I think that's where St. Lawrence is, but yeah, this isn't very intense thunderstorms moving here. That's just some very high cloud that's moving through. Yeah, there's absolutely nothing on the rain radar through here. But yeah, so there's no intense thunderstorms through here, which is what we wanted to see if we were going to see a bunch of rainfall around Mackay and Airlie Beach, but there's none. There's absolutely nothing to speak of. In fact, it looks like Mackay is currently under some very clear conditions right now, and that's reciprocated in the visible satellite imagery. There's just no strong thunderstorms moving through the area, and if we were to see a rainfall emergency develop there, we would have needed a bunch of thunderstorms to be starting to stream ashore at this time, and we just don't have that. So yeah, we've got nothing to really talk about in terms of the extreme rainfall situation there. Now, I will briefly just take a little poke at the rainfall forecast for inland Queensland and South Australia and also the Northern Territory. There will be places that pick up a substantial amount of rainfall. I'm expecting at least one spot in central Queensland associated with this tropical cyclone to pick up to 1,000 millimetres of rainfall. It looks like this spot's going to be north of Maxwell Town around Julia Creek, and where's that? Probably around Cloncurry. Oh, Cloncurry's over here, but it's well out of Cloncurry. And you can see 1,500 millimetres here. Now, it's the XSG3 model. It generally completely overestimates in terms of rainfall, so I wouldn't put my bottom dollar on this at all. But there will be places that pick up a substantial amount of rainfall with the passage of the remnants of this system, and you're talking at least 200 millimetres across a widespread area of central Queensland, and even down here towards Birdsville, you're talking about places picking up 500 to 600 millimetres through here. As this storm stalls. However, that's not really reciprocated well through other forecast models. They're still calling for a bit of rainfall down here. I mean, both the Eastern WF and the GFS expect up to 50 millimetres, which for Birdsville is about half a year's worth of rainfall. But they're mostly keeping the rainfall in a more tropical zone of Queensland. Still, though, one or two locations picking up to 500 millimetres, and a lot of areas picking up over 200 to 300 millimetres of rainfall from the landfall of this system. And what is also interesting is that they're taking this storm further north at this point. They're also calling for that landfall between Cardwell and Ingham, completely missing air. And I mean, at this point, it wouldn't completely shock me, considering we were so certain with an air landfall, and we're also so certain with this system becoming a severe tropical cyclone. And now both of those situations seem rather unlikely. We're more looking now for that Townsville landfall, and we're looking at a very weak tropical cyclone of Category 1 or Category 2 proportions, which, as most of you guys in the tropics know, a Category 1 is absolute nothing. It's just a blustery bunch of thunderstorms, and a Category 2 is fairly weak. When you get towards high-end Category 2 status, then they can get a little bit rougher, and the Bureau of Meteorology still expects this storm to come ashore as a high-end Category 2, but it's nothing compared to a high-end Category 3 or even a Category 4 is what we were once expecting. I'll also take a look at storm surge briefly, because it does still have a shot at producing some pretty significant storm surges ashore on Townsville and across to Hamilton Island and Airlie Beach. There's some still pretty big waves around the centre of the storm, 5 metres, and it is a weak system as well, so 5 metre waves through a weak system is fairly high, and that's because the system has had so long over water. It's been able to really drive those wave heights up quite substantially, and these wave heights will increase as it approaches the coastline. There will be peak wave heights approaching sort of 6 or 7 metres in one or two locations well offshore, so that will cause some pretty significant erosion to some of the keys along the Whitsunday Islands and down towards Hamilton Island as well. However, the wave heights will be pretty small as you get closer to the coastline, but still areas around Townsville could receive peak wave heights approaching 4 to 5 metres from this tropical cyclone as it makes landfall, and you could be talking about peak storm surge heights of around, or at a guess, maybe 1.5 to 2 metres. The Bureau of Meteorology actually doesn't give a forecast on storm surge. They just say a significant storm tide is expected, which I find very annoying because I would love a specific number to really work with. But if I was to guess, maybe a 2 metre rise in water above the highest astronomical tide, which is still very, very significant flooding. I mean, you're talking about locations around Ayr receiving a 2 metre wall of water move through in a location that's very, very wet. Not wet, very, very low lying. And thank you to the comment saying that sugarcane is growing around here. That really bugged me when I was making yesterday's video, but thank you so much for the comments on that. That really does help. But yeah, you could be seeing some pretty significant inundation for locations between Cardwell down to Bowen. So if you live in an area that's prone to flooding, you've still got today to really sandbag your home up and make sure that your property is flood ready. But in that case, I wouldn't be preparing for a world-ending scenario here. It's going to be a lot weaker than Cyclone Debbie. It's also going to be a lot drier than Cyclone Debbie. So I know I've been saying prepare for a situation like Cyclone Debbie, but it's not even going to be half as bad as Cyclone Debbie. You might get a little bit of flooding, you might get a little bit of rainfall, and you might get 1 or 2 very destructive wind gusts, but it's not going to be a situation where half of Bowen or Proserpine or even down towards Mackay gets flooded, and you're not talking about 1,000 millimetres of rainfall falling around Charters Tower. So it's a much better situation from Cyclone Debbie, and that's all because this silly system has refused to form in some of the best conditions in the entire world. And I'm dare to say the conditions might actually have been too good. A couple of days ago, it was firing some really intense thunderstorms thunderstorms south of Papua New Guinea, and I believe that might actually have hampered the storm's formation chances, because thunderstorms, they can create their own mesovortices, which are basically small swirls in themselves, and that might have just completely ripped the storm's developing center of circulation apart. We've seen it before in storms impacting the Philippines. They can get some really nasty thunderstorm activity up there, but we very rarely see it down here. But I reckon that could be a reason for why the storm has completely busted in this situation. So a very good news update for people expecting this tropical cyclone to come ashore. It will likely still be a tropical cyclone of Category 1 proportion, so prepare for a Category 1 or 2 strength tropical cyclone, but I reckon we're still going to be backtracking on that by tonight. Stay tuned for tonight's update, and also stay tuned for updates on the Cyclones Oz channel. It's been a pleasure giving you this update. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.
Thank you for watching our content this update. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to get more updates covering all things weather and geophysics impacting Australia and the Oceania region. Subscribe to our other channels for more content from across the network, and be sure to check out our website where you can find free access to floater and radar imagery and articles on everything weather and much more. If you wish to support us directly, you can purchase some of our merchandise. We have a wide variety of clothing and homeware, or you could become an Ultimate Fan, which is the best way to directly support us, granting you some sweet perks and offers, including features in our custom storm animations, live streams, and much more.